I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. We're in Studio C at Sweetwater, and we are talking with Ryan West today. Great to see you.
Hey, man. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
So, mix engineer, producer, Usher, Eminem, Rhianna, Dr. Dre, Kanye, the list goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
Man, you've been on a roll. I mean, you're just cranking out great stuff.
Trying, man. Trying to. I feel very fortunate to have all those great clients, but it's 20 years worth of work on the discography, so they kind of pile up. Like at a certain point, you look back and you go like, "Holy hell!" We were just talking earlier about specific records that like what's my favorite record that I had ever worked on, and I have to sit there and think, and I can't even remember like half of them. I have to look back at it, to see what I was doing back in 2000 or whatever.
Yeah, right.
It seems like forever ago, but
Right. Well, multi-platinum, diamond, platinum, gold. I mean, you've got just a tremendous success going there. So let's take a step back and talk a little bit about how you got to where you're at now. You came out of Ohio, right?
I did, Youngstown, Ohio.
Yeah, and you were initially aiming at being a musician.
Yeah, well, I had played piano and guitar since I was a young kid. My brother was musical as well, so we played in bands. And by the time I was 15 or 16, I was saving every penny I could to buy keyboards and drum machines and stuff. And I was doing sequences when nobody else in my area was interested. So I was the kid in my bedroom who liked to tinker with stuff. That's where I developed a love for sound, because as I got a little bit more experience playing keyboards, I was buying better monitors to listen to them through, even though I didn't know much about it at the time, but I was always thrilled when I got something that really sounded that much better to me.
Right.
I think that was really the genesis of why I eventually ended up in this part of the music business, just because it just tickled me. I loved the idea of manipulating sound.
Right. So you moved to New York City. What was the impetus for the move? Were you going there to be a musician, or had you already gotten into the studio scene by that point?
I had not gotten into the studio scene at all. I knew nothing about the professional music business. Frankly, I was just at a point in my life, I was in college and I had a job, and I just wasn't happy being where I was, because I really wanted to do something with music, but I had no idea what it was going to be. But I was young and full of energy and maybe not so bright. So when I was about 22 and a half, I just decided to move to New York City and give it a go. What I ended up doing was working in a music store. I was working on 48th Street.
Okay.
And one of the guys who I was working with noticed that I was buying a bunch of recording gear because I wanted to record the bands that I was working with. So I bought, like an old Soundtracks 24x8 console and an ADAT and a couple other things. In any case, so he noticed that, and he had a client that he said might need some minor recording work done in his home studio. And I said, okay, great. Never thought about getting paid for that, but that's awesome. Right. So I went and met the client. It turned out to be a guy from Island Records who was a producer and A&R guy who had to do a lot with Drew Hill and Cisco and whatnot. And so we started working on gospel music, believe it or not. That was the first thing I started doing with like Karen Clark Shared and Benjamin Love. So that's how I cut my teeth in his little private studio. And I realized that it was possible to actually make a living at it. How to do that, I didn't really know. How to get enough work to survive was the big question. I think that's what a lot of young engineers think.
Sure.
Because it's pretty difficult to get the repeat clients and get enough business to keep yourself going. But soon enough, I found out that I loved it enough that I spent a lot of time researching and learning. I didn't have the luck to be under the tutelage of somebody who had a lot more experience than I did. So it was really me going to Barnes and Nobles and sitting in the aisle and reading as many books as I possibly could about producing, about engineering, about techniques, tactics, methods, and I made a lot of mistakes. But I think for me that was the best way to do it. For some people, it's better to go to a university and get a degree in an education and go that route. For me, it worked out a little bit differently, though.
Right, so kind of on the job training.
Pretty much on the job training. But I was a musician at the same time, so I was coming at it from that angle, and I'd already been doing a bunch of keyboard sequencing and that kind of stuff. So the whole multi-track thing made sense to me. It wasn't a huge leap in terms of the way I was thinking about it. I just needed to learn the technology. So
Right. Yeah. I read an interesting quote from you in an interview where you were talking about making the leap to being basically a mix engineer.
Yeah.
Where you had said that there was a certain point where you decided to do that.
Right.
And basically you weren't able to cash the checks that you were.
My mouth was writing big checks, and my butt couldn't cash. I think that's what you mean to say.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, I ran into this gentleman maybe about a year ago. He's a dance remix producer named Tony Coluccio. Really great guy, very talented. I was working with him and another guy named Jonathan Peters, who was a very popular remix guy back then. He did like Whitney Houston's "My Love Is Your Love" remix that blew up, you know. And
Right.
so he had a great studio, and I was working with Tony, and I was begging them. I was like, I really want to mix. I think I can mix. I really want to mix, and they finally did give me a chance. And a couple days into the process of mixing a couple of tracks, Tony very rightly and politely pulled me aside and said, "Hey man, look, I think maybe you probably jumped into mixing too soon. You've got a little bit of work to do before you can do it." And of course, at the time, I was crushed.
Sure.
Somebody I respected and admired told me like I wasn't doing the job that I thought I was doing. So, but it was a great learning experience. Years later now, I thank him. I thanked him when I saw him just about a year and a half ago. And I told him, I was like, "You're responsible for me wanting to be better." Because you were the first person who rightly told me, like, I've got some work to do. I have things to learn. And so that kind of just put me back into academic mode. And I realized that if you're going to do this part of the business, you have to do a lot of continuing education. You've got to always reinvent yourself. Always double check what you're doing. Always go back and re-educate yourself. Try to learn from absolutely everybody. Every intern, every employee, everywhere you go, everybody you talk to has got something to teach you. So that's my mindset now.
Right, right. Well, I bring that up not to embarrass you with that.
Oh, I'm
with that
not embarrassed
experience.
at all.
But actually, it was interesting. You said that made you want to really get into it, and you talked about the education and things. So there are kind of two responses you can have to something like that happening. One, you can say, "I'm done.
Right.
I'm going to go do something else. I must not be good at this." Or you can dive in. I guess what I'm interested in is kind of the mindset and the attitude you had that made you take the path of saying this is an opportunity rather than this is a failure.
Yeah, I guess you could react in one or two different ways to that, and I've seen a lot of people just sort of give up. They get exasperated, but it's a tough business. You got to have a little bit of thick skin. I do believe I was tenacious enough, but I think what drove me more than anything was I just loved it so much. I was already enjoying a little bit of limited success. I had some tracks that were out there, on the radio, and I was excited by it, and I knew it's something I really, really wanted to do. And as much as maybe at the time I was demoralized, quitting was not an option. Like, this is really what I wanted to do. I mean, I still, to this day, 20 years later, I can't believe I have a career doing this, and because I love it so much. I mean, I would be doing this whether people were paying me or not. It's just a miracle that people want to pay me to do it. So that's how I feel about it. I feel truly fortunate, and I feel that I had some very good luck along the way by meeting some really great people whom I learned a lot from, and also gave me the kind of mindset that I think I needed in order to continue and strive to be better every day.
Right.
So I think that's what it was.
Right. You've mentioned luck a few times, but really it's a matter of you have to be prepared.
I don't know if I'm a big believer in actual luck. I mean, that's just kind of the way I describe it. I think you're correct. It's definitely a matter of being ready for opportunities when they come up, and be ready to be the person in place and available and the right person for the job. And so I think what I was doing for quite a long time, what I still do, is I'm always scanning the environment, trying to figure out what people actually need, as opposed to just offering something that I think I do well at. And putting other things into place, which is kind of what moved me more into production. So I started looking to, I bring in outside personnel to do certain things, and I have like a whole Rolodex full of people that do specific things much better than I can do it. And I think that's what attracts my clients to my services, because I'm a great facilitator, I think, in that way. Meaning that pretty much anything that they can think of that they need to get done, I know the person or the place or the service, and I think I'm a little bit of a clearinghouse. But at the same time, I'm facilitating their records. I'm sometimes recording them, sometimes producing them, often mixing them, and I think, luck doesn't play into it. As much as the openness and willingness to do just about anything that you need to do in order to get the record done correctly for the client.
Right.
So I think that's my philosophy on it.
Right, right. You said that actually the reason your clients hire you is because you're a team player.
Definitely try to be a team player. I think I'm one of the few people who gets hired as a mix engineer who's budget conscious. Everybody's trying to get the biggest check that they can possibly get, but that's not the long game. That's keeping your eye on the long game, I think, is super important, and that's why after 20 years, I still have clients coming back to me that I've worked with 20 years ago. There are people that were producers or managers 15, 18 years ago that I was working with that were at a much lower level, who are now presidents of record labels.
Right.
So I think building a career and building your Rolodex and building your customer base is all based on Obviously your attitude and how you deal with your clients, but how well you deliver as well. My philosophy is just under promise and over deliver. When I was in college, I worked for Tandy Corporation. I was a Radio Shack store manager.
Nice.
And I think I learned a lot during training for that job about how to manage a retail store and look at profits and loss statements, things that normally somebody in my position as an engineer or a mixer wouldn't be thinking about. So I'm very conscious of project budgets. The record labels, I think, appreciate that an awful lot, and so they feel very confident and comfortable coming to me because they know it's going to get executed well and it'll be done on time, and it'll come in under budget almost always.
Right.
So I think this is a service job. I think people don't think of it the same way. They think of the service job as being like a waiter in a restaurant or whatnot, but this is a service industry that we do in the music business. Yes, it does have creative aspects to it, but you got to have your customer service down, otherwise you're nowhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm curious, at the level that you're working at, with the artists that you're working at, how involved are they at the mix stage? Are you doing the mix and sending it to them? Are they there for the mix? How does that work?
It runs the gamut. Some artists don't want to have any involvement at all because they've been working hard on the record for 6 months or a year, and they've heard it so many times, and they're hearing it their way, and what they're interested in is having a professional mixer put it in a new light, paint it in a new light, to really bring out the subtleties, to really bring out the message, the intent, and the feeling, and the vibe of the record. So there are some people that are like that, and then there are some people who really want to be there every step of the way because they're interested in the process. They may know a little bit about it themselves, or may know a lot about it themselves, but need that second set of ears in order to really bring the nuances together and do the subtle kind of things that really make a great mix. But they're also anywhere in between. Some people want to Skype into the mix session because they're in Japan or whatever. And I just try to be as accommodating to everybody as possible. Over the years, though, I've become one of those mix engineers who prefers to be in the room by myself for about 90% of the time. So my thing of late has been, if somebody wants to be involved, I say, great, fantastic. Give me, however many days I think it's going to take me to get to the 90% level, and then come in and we'll do a day or day and a half in the studio, and we'll vibe out. We'll have all the fun you want. You won't be fatigued by the process. You don't have to watch the sausage being made, so to speak.
Right.
Sausage is delicious, but you don't want to watch it being made.
Right.
So that's what I try to do. I try to make the sausage, and then we just grill it by the time they get there. And that works out really, really well. They feel involved in the process, and they have their input before the thing gets turned over to mastering. So it's much more effective in terms of time management too, because I'm not going back and doing recalls for these people. They've gotten their opportunity to have the changes made. They've been able to hear it clearly the same way that I heard it. And they can take references out and listen to them wherever they want to. And then by the time it goes to mastering, they feel very confident in it. So I think that works.
Right,
Yeah.
right, nice. So tell us how the process actually works. What do you get when you sit down to mix a project?
For if it's a mix project and I'm only mixing, that also runs the gamut. But most of the time these days, I'm getting raw files from whatever DAW that they were working in. So if it's Pro Tools, I ask them for just give me the Pro Tools session that you'd been working in, the final recorded version of it, in the state that it's in. Which means to say, like, if they've done a rough mix to it, then I'm going to get that. I ask them for a 2-track of the rough mix so that I have an idea of what they were doing. I may do a complete departure from what they were doing. Often not, though. I do try to stick to the same zone as the rough mix, not necessarily the same balance or anything like that, or the same effects, but because this is something they've been producing and creating for a while, I have to admit that their intent is got to be in there somewhere.
Right.
So I'm mining for the intent at first. If they've done it in another program like Logic or what have you, I obviously need them to spit out stems. So I'm reminding them all the do's and don'ts, which is don't turn on normalize, so we're not getting blown up files. And if there's anything you feel really strongly about effects-wise that you've got in your rough mix, then please print the wet one for me and print me a dry one so that I have the option to sub it in or sub it out. And generally, people are pretty good about it. Years past, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, a lot fewer people knew exactly how to transfer files between sessions and send stems to a mix engineer. But now that so much of this stuff operates online, people have to send files back and forth all the time because you're collaborating with somebody who's on the other coast, or their mixer is in another country or what have you. So it's gotten a little bit easier, and DAWs have gotten better and they've gotten smarter. So typically what I'm getting is a set of files that contains mostly the raw recorded data, and then I ask them to include the wet files for things that they feel strongly about. There may be a guitar part that's got this big phaser sweep and a bridge, and rather than me recreating it, it may sound great already. I'm also, I'm not just mining for the intent that they were going for during the production phase and recording phase, I'm also mining for the little nuggets of cool sounding stuff that some of these producers are finding on their own. And there's no reason to, reinvent the wheel.
Right.
Really none at all. I mean, I think once I relaxed a little bit about that, not trying to recreate everything, and working with at least some of what was already done, it's made my life so much easier, and it's much more enjoyable because now I get new ideas. Now that's how I get new ideas of maybe what I'll do 10 mixes from now. I might have heard something that somebody else did and go, wow, that would work so well here.
Right. So. Right. One of the you work in a wide variety of genres, but of course you're known for the urban, hip hop, R&B, and of course a hallmark of that style is there's often a very big bottom end on those mixes, and that's something that I think a lot of mixers struggle with, and recording engineers as well, getting that bottom end to translate well among different playback situations. Can you talk a little bit about how you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a question I really get a lot. I'm fortunate enough that I get asked to speak at some schools and functions, and young engineers often ask that question, especially if the conference or the event is focused on urban or hip hop music. My go-to answer for that is learn to use high-pass filtering judiciously. And understand where and why you'd want to apply it. So I talk about some of the very basic things that they're concerned about, which is if you have a kick drum that's pretty big and pretty hefty, and then you've got an 808 that's operating at the same time, how do you stop them from fighting one another, right? So the thing that a lot of engineers talk about is frequency separation, where you're letting the 808 live in a lower register than the bottom end of the kick drum, so they're not occupying the same physical space. But there's lots of other things you can do. You can send a side chain from the kick drum to a compressor on the 808. That's every time the kick drum hits, it just compresses the 808 just for a microsecond, just enough to let that attack envelope and the initial attack envelope of the kick drum come through, and then they decide to separate themselves. That's how I deal with low end quite frequently. The other tactic I would say that's equally as important, and you should do both of these, or you really should try both of them, is to high pass pretty much anything like a vocal or acoustic guitar or electric guitar and most keyboard sounds, high pass them at 70, 80, 100 hertz. Remove all that sub-frequency stuff so that there's plenty of dynamic energy available in the low end of the mix. It makes room for the other things that you want to put there. So you're sculpting everything else out of that range where those two things want to live. Right. Also, even with the 808s, and this sounds counterintuitive because if you're trying to get more low end, why the heck would you want to put a high pass filter on it? But all that sub-energy below 30, 35, 40, and sometimes even up to 45 hertz can't be reproduced by most systems that people are listening on. We're fortunate enough to have really great speakers and we can hear this stuff, but that's great for cleaning it up. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll actually solo my sub on my Dangerous Monitor ST, and I'll just listen to what's going on down there in that energy in below 60 hertz or so. And all of a sudden it becomes clear like things are fighting each other in that range. So what I'll do is I'll high pass the kick drum up to 45 or 50 or something like that, and let the main meat of that kick drum live at like 65 or 70, and then of course an octave above that. And then I'll also filter something like an 808 or a sub bass kind of sound, but I'll filter it just slightly lower in the register than that. So what I'm doing is I'm just sort of like lifting them off the ground floor frequency-wise, so that there's just dynamic energy available in that part of the mix. Once you can kind of get those things happening, and then you get the movement with the rest of the percussion, the rest of the drums and specifically claps and snares and hi-hats and all that kind of stuff. That's where your kind of your bass is. And then with hip-hop, it's like all the other elements sort of slide in around it. So your vocal, your kick, and your snare are the biggest things in a hip-hop mix. So if you can carve out spaces for those things, then you can sort of wrap other things around: keyboard sounds, samples, effects, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But I think low-end management is tough until you get the idea that you don't need to keep all that sub-energy, and that things do need to live in different geographical places in the mix. Right. Just getting stuff out of the way.
Sure.
That's basically the thing. Yeah.
Sure. So you do mix yourself with a subwoofer. Do you recommend that for people mixing?
Well, it depends on your room. And it depends on what kind of sub you can afford, because I don't think low-end subs can be very misleading. They're fun to listen to for like home theater or stuff like that, but mixing with them can really give you the wrong idea of what's going on with the low end, especially if you're working in a room that's less than ideal. Maybe it's not treated, it's your bedroom or it's a basement, and there's flat walls, and and you're getting early reflections, and then the bass is building up in the corners of the room, and you're getting mode changes. So it takes a bit of thought to figure out whether a subwoofer is going to work for you. I have one in my setup that's normally off because the speakers that I use produce more than enough low end for me to mix with, and I find that I'm actually a little bit more accurate with it. I will always check on the subwoofer at some point to see what's going on down there, so I'll check early on in the mix, and then like 3/4 the way through, and then when I'm listening at the end, just for fun for me, I'll pop it in and let it rock a little bit.
Right.
But I'm using some great speakers. I've got I have a minty pair of NS10s running on a Bryston. I've got a pair of Dyne Audio BM6 Mark 1s, which I think are great speakers, and Focal Solo 6s. And also some $20 crappy Altec Lansing computer speakers that I got on Amazon.
Nice.
Little trick I learned from Howie Weinberg, who has a pair of almost the same ones sitting on his vintage Neumann mastering desk.
Right.
But he was nice enough to give that trick up to me. And I check on those too. They're very mid-forward, and they kind of give you an idea what's happening. They're full range, little 3-inch USB powered jimmies.
Right.
And they just give you another insight. So, and I reference on a couple different headphones too. But the subwoofer's there. It's like my fun button.
Right.
Especially for hip hop, if you got a transition that's coming up in a song and there's some big swooping subline that goes, boom, and you hit the sub on for that, and you go, yeah.
There it is. Yeah.
Yeah, there it is.
Nice. So at the other end of the production process, another question that comes up frequently is how much should you do to the stereo, the 2-bus, on the way out before you send it to the mastering engineer?
I think it's whatever the heck you like. I really do believe that. Everybody's got a different philosophy about how much they do there. How much they'll do pre-mastering, which is to say, maybe it's not going to a proper mastering engineer and it needs to have some loudness and a couple other things. I don't think there's any rules to any of this stuff, and if I shy away from anybody who has a rigid idea of how they like to do things. My own method has changed a couple of times over the years. My personal preference right now is I generally wait until I'm about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through the mix before I apply anything there. The reason why I do that is because I think I work harder to get the mix actually much closer and much better before I get to that phase. When I get to the phase where I'm starting to adjust the 2-track stereo output, then it's more like I'm enhancing, I'm lifting. I'm not trying to squash and bring things down and glue them together necessarily because I've done a lot of that during the mix phase.
Right.
I'm not an over-compressor. I tend to, I tend to address things from a musician's or producer's point of view, which is to say, I'm concerned about, hey, is this the right instrument? Do we have the right arrangement? Does this really belong here? My favorite tool in the studio is the mute button, because sometimes all you need to do is take something away in order for other things to shine through. Some producers are a little, excitable, and they get excited about the song and they start adding all this kind of stuff to the production. Sometimes it goes a little bit too far. I've had the occasion where I might take a thing or two out and I send the mix to the client, and I'm waiting to hear what they say. And I can remember a couple of occasions where they got back to me and said, "This really sounds amazing, dude. How did you get all that to work together?" And I'm like, I took this and that out because they didn't belong. They were fighting each other. So yeah, I think it helps to be a musician when you're doing this kind of stuff because you think of things from that point of view. You're thinking about arrangement. You're thinking about, hey, does the tone of this guitar really work in the mix? Maybe I need to reamp that or sub it out for something else. So you have to be willing to fix the problem at no matter what the cost is. But I don't believe there's any rules to it, but I don't believe you should ever be wrangling all kinds of processing just to fix a problem. You should go back and fix it from the source if you can. Now, sometimes we don't have that choice because maybe the producer is, I don't know, fled to Guatemala or something. Right. But we can't get them to reproduce something. And then at that time, I'll either deal with it the best way that I can, or I'll go to the artist or the management and I'll say, hey, look, I just don't think this is working. What do you think? Here's what I'd like to do. Maybe we can fix this on our own and get the record out as we believe it should be. It's all in service of the song. That's always been my motto as a musician. It's always been my motto as an engineer, as a producer, as a mixer. If it's in service of the song and you're being honest with yourself instead of fooling yourself about the little tricks you just learned and thinking that belongs in that. People like to do that. They learn a trick, they hear something on a video or whatever, they go and they employ it in the wrong situation or just misapply it, and they wonder why it didn't really work the way they thought it was going to work, or they didn't work the way they saw it on the video. Yeah, man. I like to wait until the end, like I said, to be able to put anything on my master because it's like, I don't know, it's like putting a paint job on the car you just built. So oftentimes I'll end up using, I'm a huge UAD user, but oftentimes I'll end up using the Dangerous compressor and the Bax EQ. I'll insert those after my summing mixer, and with both of those I get a subtle lift. Those aren't like, you can make them really work hard, but for me I like stuff on my master bus to just be sort of gentle lifts, and I do them in stages. So before I get back into the DAW from analog land, I'm doing a couple things there with the compressor and the Bax. And then more often than not, on that master fader, it will go to the UAD ATR 102, which is their 2-track mastering plugin, recorder plugin emulation. It just has this thing to it, man. We were demoing it yesterday, and I was just flipping it on and flipping it off, and it was so dramatic. But not changing the mix necessarily in a way. It just sort of like wakes it up. That's the best way I can put it. As a matter of fact, I have a funny story. This very well-known mastering engineer and I were doing a panel together along with another very well-known mix engineer, and this mastering engineer's idea was, hey guys, why don't you send me a couple of recent mixes you've been working on, and we'll master them, and we'll do like a before and after for the panel we're going to be sitting on at Webster Hall in New York City. I said, great, this guy's going to master my song for free. And so I was really excited about it. So I sent him 2 copies of it. I sent one was just the regular mix, the way I'd done it, and then the other one was, I just labeled it with 102 on it, so he wouldn't know what it was. I sent that to him. He calls me, of course, 20 minutes later, and he goes, what's the difference between these two things? This one sounds really good. With 102, what does that mean? I said, well, that's the UAD ATR 102 plugin. I told him what the settings were, and he's like, I got an ATR 102 here, and this sounds very much like it. Huh. Turns out that guy ended up putting his 102 in the closet, shrink wrapped, and he bought the plug-in, and he's happy with it now.
Nice.
So, yeah, that's a great plug-in. I love that thing. And sometimes I'll do maybe a little bit more precise EQing if I feel like I've maybe missed something in the mix and it's better served to do it on the master. But I try not to do too much of that. I try to really get it right in the mix. But that's it. If I'm sending the mix to a client and they're not going to master it, I may do some other things further in order to enhance it and bring the level up and get it to competitive levels. I'm not one of those guys like to push the envelope on that. If I'm hearing the artifacts of limiting and compressing on the master fader, I'm not happy, because I've built my mix to be what it is before I did all that. So that's the talk through of the philosophy of why I do it when I do it. Some people like to put it on right at the beginning. They mix into it, and they find that very successful for themselves. Again, there's no rules. Like, I mean, I know there's a lot of classes that tell you this is the way things are done conventionally, but every day is a brave new world, because the technology keeps evolving, keeps changing. People's expectations, the ways that they're listening and consuming music change all the time. So I'm a technology lover, so I'm always after that. I'm always trying to figure out, hey, how can I best serve up a product that people are going to enjoy the way they want to enjoy it.
Right, right. So you mentioned summing and things on the two-bus and the Dangerous compressor and Bax, and I know you've been a hybrid mixer for a lot of years, and we were talking about your growing interest in hardware and things. And tell us a little bit about that. What draws you to using a summing mixer? And particularly, you're a Dangerous guy, and of course we have a bunch of Dangerous gear here as well.
Yeah, I totally fell into the Dangerous world. I mean, somehow I ended up in like the Dangerous ecosystem. I'm not sure how it all happened, but the Dangerous used to have a studio space in Manhattan, which now is Flux Studios and belongs to my very good friend Fab DuPont.
Right.
And I do quite a lot of work out of there. I love the place. It's like my favorite studio to work in. And he's a huge Dangerous guy,
right?
Of course, because he's known all those folks for quite a while. I knew about Dangerous for a long time. My first encounter with them was working with the same producer I was telling you about, Tony Coluccio. They had bought a two-bus, I think probably one of the first 100 units that was on the market. Or they bought it very quickly after it came out. And I had no idea what the hell it was. I didn't know how to use it. I didn't know anything about it. And it just kind of sat in that rack, and the guy kept pointing to it. He's like, we just spent a lot of money on that. You should use it. I'm like, I don't even know what to... So fast forward a number of years later, I had never really built my own personal rig, because I was always contracted to work in studios in LA and New York, and they were great big studios that had everything you could possibly want, and I just didn't feel the need to put something together for myself. And of course, I live in a Manhattan apartment, so the space is like is at a premium, and so when I decided I was going to start trying to do some work from home, even though I knew it was going to be not as great of an environment as I was used to, I figured I could at least start editing and doing some basic things there, and then I could transition that into a professional studio where I could finish it. So what I did was I had a very simple interface, which I won't name because I didn't like it at all. It didn't sound good. It was from a company that that makes other great stuff, but the one that I had wasn't really what I was looking for. And my clients kind of knew the difference. They were like, "I heard what you did in the studio over here, and then what you did over here is it's not matching up." And I realized I had to step the game up. So what I ended up doing first was doing a bunch of research, and I found the D-Box. And I went and purchased the D-Box. That was maybe 7 or 8 years ago, something on that order, and just ran the spiff out of my interface into the D-Box, and all of a sudden my world was open to how good a DA converter could possibly be. That digital analog converter that's in that box is just spectacular. It's got a great sound stage. The depth of field is just amazing. So it was a night and day change for me.
Right.
So that's what got me onto understanding of the quality of Dangerous products. And then of course I moved on, got a better interface and started using the summing in the D-Box. And I was like, this is how I want to work, man. This is a portable system. I could literally pack it in a bag and go anywhere in the world with it and feel like I can get a job done. So I got excited by these small footprint systems, and I still keep a couple. I still have my one D-Box with an Apollo in a little 3-space soft rack that I can put over my shoulder, and I can head down to CBS if I got a gig doing the Tonight Show or whatever.
Right.
And I've got everything that I need to have with me with my laptop. It's extraordinarily powerful. When I started in this business in 1997, that kind of capability would cost you $100,000.
Sure.
I mean, at least, right? So I was really excited by that, and I think somebody had mentioned, maybe Fab DuPont had mentioned to the folks over at Dangerous that I'd been using it and really liked it. So they invited me to come over to Sterling during AES one year, and I just had a conversation with Bob from Dangerous, and we kind of found out we had a very similar philosophy and a very similar path, you know, in life and in the music business. We just got on really well, and I started to understand their design philosophy, which is clean, clear, open, punchy, articulate, fast. You know, everything that I wanted in the hardware that went between what I was working on in the computer to my ears.
Right.
Right. So for me, the attraction was obviously the grade of converters first, especially the Convert 2. When that came out, I was just as pleased with that as I was with the DA and the D-Box. And then I realized it was time to go full bore because my client scape changes all the time, as does everybody else's. Budgets at a certain point had dwindled down, so I had to do more work on my own so I could keep the overhead low. Again, service industry thing for my clients. I was trying to make sure that it was affordable. So, you know, so I just thought that it was time for me to make a more professional system so that I could get more done on my own. And then I realized that Flux Studios had been investing in their converters as well, and that there was a potential for me to just be able to pick up my laptop and take one Thunderbolt cable out of it, put it in my bag, go down to Flux, and continue working on something.
Right.
Because I could just go in there and plug in the same cable because Fab has a similar system in a couple of rooms that he's got over there. So to me, that idea was super attractive. I'm like, wow, I can have a mirror system, and all it really depends on is my laptop. That's amazing. So I got 2 Convert 8s. I got the 2 Bus Plus, and at the time I was using an Apogee product as my front end, as my A to D, because Dangerous did not have an A to D yet.
Right.
But eventually they came out with the AD Plus, and I added that. And now I've got an entire Dangerous rig. It's like from soup to nuts. It's all Dangerous, from the Monitor ST, which I love for controlling my entire environment. The AD Plus, and now I also have the compressor and a back EQ. So I have a little rig in my Manhattan apartment that is literally just almost everything is Dangerous in it. And the integration between how all those devices work together for a mixing system was just is too attractive for me to pass up.
Right.
It was exactly what I wanted. I wanted boxes that didn't color my sound. I mean, converters that have a specific sound or a specific color are great. I've had the Apogee stuff, like I said, and that used to be my front end. But I really wanted clean, clear, open, and punchy, and be able to choose where I wanted to add transformer sound, or if I wanted to have the roundness of this particular sounding, you know, interface or what have you. I wanted to be able to choose that where I wanted it, rather than it having to be a patina that's over everything. Other people have other methods. Like I said, there's no rules in this business, but for me, that was what was important. And that's what I was talking about in terms of their design philosophy. I mean, they're designed to have very low crosstalk between the channels and the summing mixer. That was really important to me because I'm all about getting separation between instruments, creating geographical locations in a mix, especially when we're talking about things like we discussed just a little bit earlier, where you're trying to manage low end.
Right.
I needed to have mono channels for my 808s and my kick drums, so I needed a summing mixer that was able to give me at least 2 or 3 mono channels. It just happened to fit the bill. I've had a lot of different stuff. I've had some really fantastic and not so fantastic stuff. But in general, it's been, like most studios, it's a mishmash of different things that weren't necessarily meant to be integrated together. Not necessarily as closely as if you get the system from one manufacturer who does everything that works the way that you want it to do.
Right.
Right. So I mean, listen, I'd love to have every flavor of different converters so I could just pick and choose whenever I want to. But if it's something that I'm going to use every day on a wide variety of material, and I need to be able to have it work quickly, which just means to say I can't waste a lot of time on recalls. I need that to happen quickly. I found that working as a hybrid mixer, I'm cutting down on the number of physical things that I need to recall, which I just take pictures of now with my phone and add it to my session data. And it's almost as instant as recalling just a Pro Tools in the box session. So it's fast for me. It's portable between the studio that I really love to work in and my home. Right. And it just made sense in terms of the design philosophy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Man, Ryan, this has been like a master class on mixing and gear and the whole thing. It's awesome.
No, thanks for having me, man.
I know you're here talking about the dangerous stuff with the sales engineers, and you've been here a couple of times now, right?
Yeah.
Coming out, and we're always glad when you drop by. I'm glad we had a chance to sit down and do the video today.
Oh yeah, man, my pleasure.
Yeah.
Glad to be here at Sweetwater. This is an amazing place.
Oh, thank you, and we appreciate your time, and come back soon.
I will. You bet on it. You can bet on it.
Yeah.
All right, man.
Look forward to it.
Thank you, buddy.
Great to see you.
All right, I can see you too.
And thank you for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute. I'm Mitch Gallagher.